It's 1:30. We'll be starting the Environmental Matters Committee meeting. I am with Alderman Pfeiffer and Alderman Arnett, and we have a lot on our agenda today. So if you are getting me, if I'm speeding you along, it's nothing personal, but we've got a lot to do and an hour and a half to do it. First, we have approval of the minutes. I'll look for a motion for both minutes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All approved. Minutes are approved. Legislation before the committee, we have 0417, lease of city property to Chesapeake Marine Tours. Do we have someone from the administration to present this? Okay, can we get someone from the administration to present this? Thank you. Debbie, I'm going to pass on this until we can get someone from the administration. Whoever they want to... Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on to general discussion then. First, we have Forest Drive sector study. And I appreciate Dr. Nash, is here. And are you here alone for the city? Okay. If you expect him, then I'll pass, certainly. Yep. Okay, moving right along. Ms. Broadbent, you're up. Stormwater Management. Okay, so we have nothing loaded to Granicus for Stormwater Management. I just got handed to me a few moments ago this. I haven't even opened it to know what it is yet. The context of my initial request to have this is periodically we like to hear where money is getting spent on stormwater management. We've I think come a long way in the past few years as far as getting a better insight as to where the money is going. The money, as we also have observed, has been shifted from projects to more of staff once we went to project-based budgeting or whatever it was called, and so we lost money for projects. There was a study that was done last year, which we've heard about, and I think has been effective and successful, and that has laid out the need for a lot more money on stormwater management, I think. So I was looking for an update on that. Now, since that time, we've also heard about one particular project, which I believe you were advised of, Ms. Broadbent, that we have a few people in the audience that are concerned about, and that's the St. Luke's, am I saying it? St. Luke's project. So, update on the projects, update on the funding and spending, and if you could also touch on the St. Luke's, if you cover as much as you want, and then I think there's probably a few people in the audience that we'll hear from on any of those topics.
Very good. Good afternoon. I'm Maria Broadbent, Director, Office of Environmental Policy. The blue document that I've handed you is a revised version of one that I've already given you. So as an appendix to the watershed improvement plan, we were able to fund to do a cost analysis. So this is the study of our cost of compliance with our MS4, our stormwater permit. The original version had a couple of things that I wanted to be changed so they're a little bit more in line with what it is that the city does. The previous version, so really the only thing changed was how we spend money over time related to our capital improvement plan. The previous version took all the capital monies and divided them over the timeline for compliance, as opposed to putting them in here more realistically according to how we would spend the money. So that's the only change. And I apologize for not getting it to you earlier, but I did get it in the mail yesterday. So to be able to look forward and make sure that we have our thoughts on, how we're going to get to 2025 and all of the stormwater projects that we need to do, we kind of need to take a multi-pronged approach. And in order to do that, we've outlined in here several different options, one of which is to change how much money we're collecting for stormwater. Before we do that, we're going to make sure that we're investing enough money to really get the program started. So the CIP budget this year is going to show $1 million in it for stormwater projects. And we are exploring the option of working with, people are calling them P3 contracts, but they're really not exactly public-private partnerships. But we have done a request for qualifications and narrowed down to two groups of consultants, and are looking to narrow that down and considering the possibility, if the funding does get funded through the budget process, of actually having a group of folks that will take on the in-the-ground effort of taking the $1 million and designing projects and converting them, getting them in the ground, and also going back and maintaining them over 20 years. This would be very similar to the project that was done and has been, hailed by everyone, that Prince George's County has done. So it's the same idea. It'll help us in some ways to kind of get out of our own way, which isn't a terrible thing. So that we have a group of folks who are just driven on choosing the projects. They can choose them out of the ones that we had preliminary concept designs done on, or they can choose others that they find to be more cost effective. We will, however, insist that there are certain things that are happening on our property that we need to address. I've got some erosion over a Collison field that needs to be done. I've made sure that the administration knows that I want that funded this year because it's causing some erosion off the ball field there. We've got some erosion down by Children's Museum. We've got one in Ross's ward that was brought to my attention yesterday. So I want to make sure that, our own house is in order. But we also, go forward if the consultants that are going to be putting the projects in the ground think that something is a better project than what we put in there, we'll use their judgment. At the same time, we're going to continue to write grants and work with our partners that are writing grants. We have finished a couple of projects. I think Nikki Pletzer sent you a list of projects that were done and underway.
I don't recall seeing it, but...
in the last couple of days. I'll get a copy of it for
Okay.
you. We should be issuing the project permit maybe tomorrow, knock on wood, for the Spa Creek Headwaters project. That one is a really long stream restoration project grant to Spa Creek Conservancy, and it's a great project, and I look forward to taking you all on a tour. The project off of Fairfax Road, that permit's been issued. They should be underway in the next day or so. The one for St. Luke's is imminent. One at the Children's Museum is finished. That one, if you want to see it, let me know. I can give you a tour. The one at Bywater is also finished structurally. Both of those still need some planting. The one at Children's Museum, the deer ate some of the plants, so we have to replant some of them. But we are getting projects in the ground. We got a grant for a project at Ambridge to redo that pond. So we're, working on getting a contract together for a firm that's going to design and construct that.
Can you talk about the budget a little bit? Again, this is sort of our annual checkup on where we are, so let us know for this year and then what's in the budget for next year.
Sure. So the budget for the coming year, the CIP, I think you're getting the sheets from that soon, if you haven't gotten them already, has a budget sheet for $1 million for stormwater projects. And there will also be money that comes out of the stormwater fee that'll be in the public works budget for maintenance. One of the things that we have not funded is maintenance of stormwater best management practices, and we can't do them without maintaining them.
Mm-hmm.
So that funding will be in there. There'll also be, as part of the effort, some things that we need to do for, so our permit has six basic components to it, and some of them are components related to training of staff to to handle spills and pollution prevention, and we need to have some documents that are at each of the facilities that has any kind of materials, and we'll be spending some money to make sure that those plans get done in a way that's approved by the EPA, and that we have an ongoing, because we're required to do an annual training with that staff, an ongoing training program for that staff. So that's in there too.
Okay. Alderman Arnett?
Can we focus on the stormwater fee for a moment? It's $10 and change a quarter, $1 million. I don't know what the debt service is on that, but
Yeah, it's 850 or so.
right.
Sure.
So I don't think the fee was ever going to cover what we need to spend. Do you have any recommendation on potential change in the size of the fee?
I think those are decisions that the council needs to make. If that's going to be the source of the funding, it would make sense. There is on page 2-1 a chart that shows the current structure of the stormwater fee.
Right.
You know, in some eventuality, you know, I think we need to look at how we're structuring that fee. You know, we've got a better idea of what our actual costs will be, and the opportunities there to do the math. Did you find it?
What page you said, 2-1?
2-1,
the small one.
it's
That's the
table
current.
2-1.
Right.
That shows the current funding.
That's right.
I think what we talked about before was, and my understanding is what they did in Prince George's, rather than just have a proposal to raise the fees, the case was built for it first. And that helped us build to what the fee should be. Do we have that?
This document shows you what the price will be for the next 10 years.
Okay.
So there is a chart in here.
Where is that?
Right, page 3-4.
It's the biggest chart in here. 4-1, or
What's 3-4?
yeah, 3-4.
Right.
Right.
Looks like this.
Yeah.
So this is the chart that shows what our cost is from this fiscal year through to the year that we're required to have met the terms of our permit. So this gives you what the annual breakdown is, you know, with the best information available done by our consultants at AECOM,
Right.
considering both our capital and our operating expenses.
And how does this translate into what fees would support that kind of budget?
It's a matter of doing the division,
What's the divisor?
how many units you're, well, the best method of doing it is actually taking a whole number of residential units and figuring out what the size is of a typical unit, so that you end up with an ability to do a fee that's compared of the size of the impervious surface on people's property.
Mm-hmm.
They call it an ERU. It's usually done by, you know, somebody with that level of expertise. But that is the way that I would recommend doing it if you're going to go to that fee.
And has that analysis been done?
It has not.
Okay. Is that something your office would do, or that you need help from finance for?
It would be a group effort, but we would lead that charge.
I guess what I'm asking is, who should I ask for that from? Is it
Mr. Andrews.
okay?
Who?
Andrews.
So I mean, basically what we're doing, the Finance Committee started to spend a little time on the CIP last week and looking at the projects that were put together by the administration. And you know, we are in this budget for the first time what some of us have been calling for, which is finding a way to raise the rate so you could do more projects. By adding $1 million onto the CIP, we are for the first time getting outside the bounds of what the current fee delivers.
That's right.
And as Alderman Arnett said, it all ends up the same place, because we go out and borrow the money and then we start paying debt service on it. That is tied to the fee, which inherently, just like we've seen on water and sewer, inherently means you got to slowly step up the fee to cover the debt service that you. So we're sort of edging towards doing that, which I think is the right thing to do, is to figure out how over the next 5-10 years, how fast to grow that rate and how many projects you can do. And in some ways, having an infusion of one-time money, debt money, allows you to do some projects and see how far your money goes, right? So
That's right,
but
and to see,
that's where we're I mean,
that we can do
Yeah.
that as efficiently as we can if it's working with a P3 type group, so we can implement what we need to do structurally faster.
so to Jerry's point, I mean, I think the exercise this year in the finance, the way it's been presented by the administration is there's probably not a rate increase, but it is the $1 million, which sets the table for next year. You're going to have to raise the rates just to spend down the $1 million, you know. So, but it's an important question to get to of how much should you raise it over time, and how much does that buy you going forward, which I think is certainly worthwhile doing.
Well, I did a back of the envelope, and I think I remember that we have to increase it fourfold in order to start covering these costs.
Pay for everything that
Right.
was done in the
Right.
study.
So, Alderman Pfeiffer, do you think we still need to ask City Manager Andrews for the analysis of the fees to support this, with or without additional funding from the CIP?
Yeah, no, I think it's important.
Yep.
I mean, the reality is, and I alluded to how we do the water and sewer rate increases that have happened a couple times, and there's a methodology, there's a process where you go through and you sort of analyze the rates, and this is sort of what Maria's suggesting we do in the stormwater space, sort of a hybrid of that. So I think it's certainly it's an important exercise to go down the road, is whether I'm here or not, like whoever's in these chairs next year is going to have to wrestle with this, and we might as well get the proper rate, but as well as one that allows us to do more projects, which I think should be our goal.
It's similar to the utilities, but you're actually doing a lot of GIS work, so you're figuring out what an average unit is, because
Right.
one residential property that's much larger may be the equivalent of 2 units, so it's the most equitable way of doing it possible, but certainly we could start working on that analysis, but it takes a minute.
Okay. Can you speak to the St. Luke's project, please?
I'd love to, and I know there are other folks that want to speak to the St. Luke's project. We have been working on the design of the St. Luke's project for, I would say, almost a couple of years now. It is a project that is actually taking stormwater that has been piped and returning it to its more natural condition, and creating a situation where we are going to be able to better deal with some erosion that's being caused by the current setup that's there now, and also improving the shoreline so that the shoreline has the ability to absorb wave action and sequester some of the sediment, which is in a much healthier state environmentally than the current condition that exists. So the project is a win-win for St. Luke's and its neighborhood, as well as the city's environmental compliance, but goes a long way to sort of change the way it's been engineered and return it back to a more natural state. The natural conditions are able to absorb the impacts of the rainwater in a much better way than just a pipe stream is able to.
Alderman Arnett, did you want
So things that I heard over the weekend, and obviously are concerning and need to be addressed, and it was not my understanding, but that there were going to be mature trees cut down, that the step pools would have a deleterious impact on existing trees, and that it would actually increase silting coming through the project out into the creek. And I think there's some people here that might want to speak to that briefly, but that was not my understanding of the project, and that's why I was so taken back. It seems like it's the opposite of what we would want the project to be doing.
Yeah, and if we need to do more explaining of or answer any questions specifically, or show some examples and things like that, I would be happy to do that. Where the folks that are working on the design and the construction of this are as cautious as they can be is related to the removing of trees. We are very protective of those big, beautiful oak trees that run along the road there. Those are actually city trees. So we are going to install tree protection fencing, make sure that we're really protecting those. These projects will take down a few trees because we have to be able to get some big machinery into where the stream bed is going to be. But we insist that they are replanted at a higher rate than they were removed, largely because we're trying to make sure that there are enough trees that are planted that are going to shade out the invasives that would grow up in their stead. There are some projects where the conditions of the site make it possible to really reconnect a floodplain and sort of change the wooded ecology there, and the project off Ayers T. Allen is one of those. This is not that kind of project. There are several different ways of designing stream projects, and this project doesn't have enough room to have a huge floodplain connection, so we aren't getting the kinds of conditions where we will have trees with wet feet all of the time, which is what happened on that project. When you end up with a disconnected floodplain, you get trees that grow in the floodplain that are dry land trees.
Why don't we take a few minutes to hear from
Mr. Fox and Mr. Ewing, I believe, are
who here in the audience is coming to speak about the St. Luke's project? Ooh, that's a lot of people. All right. We have maybe 10 minutes at most. We're already, like I said, we have a lot on this agenda. So is there perhaps one or two spokespeople that would want to take maybe 5 minutes each? And again, hopefully you'll forgive my rushing you along, like we have a lot to cover today.
My name is Frank Fox, and I'm the Vice President of the Board of Directors for Headwaters.
And also give us your address, please.
Okay, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep.
My son works for Verizon, too. Anyway, I'm the Vice President for the Board of Directors of Severn House Condo Community.
And address, please.
The gentleman...
Address, please, sir.
I'm sorry?
Address, please.
Yes, 769 Fairview Avenue, Annapolis, Maryland, 21403.
Thank you.
Our property abuts up against the St. Luke's project, and I'm represented here, all of the gentlemen that are here, 1, 2, 3, 4 of us, we are all members of the board.
Okay.
Mr. White, Mr. Ewing have been actively involved in this for the last couple of years, and they'll be our principal speakers. But I just wanted you to know that the community we're talking about is 211 units, waterfront property, about a half mile on Back Creek, and a little bit less than a quarter of a mile or an eighth of a mile on the creek that's going to be affected, or the cove area that we call it. Okay, so without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Tom White, Mr. Dave Ewing. Dave is a licensed architect from the Pittsburgh area, has been living here for years, and Tom has been involved in development projects both here and in Florida. So they have some credibility, and they know how to read these plans to some degree. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll kick off by giving a brief history of our involvement. We were approached over a year ago to give a permanent easement for the project, which, if you know something about condominium law and what you have to do to give a permanent easement, was impossible to do in any kind of time frame. We would have even had to contact our lenders in the project to do that. We met with the designer from Underwood, Inc., Joe Aerosmith, and we went over the plans that he had at that time, and we had many questions. We weren't for or against, we just were trying to find out what was happening. Over the course of the discussions, we found out that there was not a survey done, so we weren't sure where the project was actually going to go. There was not a tree survey done. By the way, the architect, engineer on this, Joe Aerosmith, was wonderful to talk to. Very cooperative, very open, very honest. So we started down the process with him, suggesting that we would be very interested in being cooperative with the project, as long as we didn't have to give the permanent easement. We even talked about a construction easement. And we asked to be involved over the next year to see what we might be able to work out. We were shut out after that point, by the way. I did talk to Joe from time to time, but St. Luke's decided to go it without discussing it with us for whatever reason. So we just have received these plans this month, actually a couple weeks late from the Maryland Environmental Department because of a mailing snafu. So we did immediately seek out, by the way, the plans that were sent out were so small you could hardly read them. I mean, so we did set up a meeting with Joe and his companions at Underwood to just review the plans and see what we had. We did that this week. Within the plans, we have discovered some very interesting things, which I'm sure Maria has too, but fronting, by the way, there's only two properties that front this
Mr. White,
road.
I want to try to direct your comments to help me understand something. What are you asking this committee to do?
Well, we would ask that the plans be reconsidered, quite frankly, because we think that there hasn't been enough work done on the trees and on the falling water from the stormwater management system. But more directly, we have found in the plans that there is a cove created running along the shoreline of Severn House. There's only two shorelines affected, Watergate and ours. St. Luke's does not own waterfront on this property. And
So you
what we're
want
going
the
to have
project
is a backwater.
you want the project to be redone to take better account of your concerns. Is that
Correct.
Okay.
We would like to see
Okay,
at
let me pause
least
on-
at
let
a
me-
minimum a redesign.
I'm not going to be able to
Yeah.
digest all the details today,
Yeah.
so let me pause there. Ms. Broadbent, who should these concerns be addressed to? Because it doesn't seem like this committee is the right entity.
They should be addressed to me.
Okay, and have you previously been aware of these concerns?
No.
Okay. So why don't we do this? Pause this conversation. Like I said, this committee is not going to be able to solve this problem today.
Yeah.
We have
I agree.
limited scope, limited time. Ms. Broadbent is easily approachable. She's here right now. Why don't you approach her right now and see if you can schedule some time with her where you can go over your specific concerns, because she will have the ability to digest the specifics
We
that
hope to do
you're
that.
anxious to share. And then I'll look for either you, Mr. White, or Director Broadbent. Director Broadbent, is that still the right title?
Yes.
Okay. There's so much changes, I'm
Maria's
sorry. I try
good,
to be
too.
appropriate. Let us know what the appropriate feedback for us is, whether this has been resolved, whether we need to put it on next month's agenda, whether we need an extra meeting. But I think that makes more sense rather than to try to dive into the
I would
details
agree.
here.
That would be fine. I can give him my card and we can schedule something via email, but I will spend as much time as the community would like answering their
Okay.
questions.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming forward today.
Thank you.
Alderman Arnett, did you want to say anything else?
No, I think that's the right way, but I'm kind of curious, what would be the body, the adjudicative body anyway? This is an administrative process, right?
I think so.
Right. All right. So,
I think it's ultimately going to be Director Broadbent's decision,
right.
but if she can factor in the
All right,
thoughts.
so we appreciate you coming.
Okay. Getting back to the agenda, we're going to pick it up.
To Debbie.
I'm sorry?
You're going to do Debbie next?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Back to the top, 01417, lease of city property to Chesbrook Marine Tours. And I believe we have Ms. Leonard for the administration here.
No, that's okay.
Thank you, Ms. Leonard.
Good afternoon. Ashley Leonard, Acting City Attorney. I believe Debbie Goslin is also here.
Great. What should we know about this lease
Okay, so
that has 8 sponsors or so?
overall, it is very similar to the prior leases you've seen with Chesapeake Marine Tours. The big difference is the length of time. For city purposes, we should consider this a 10-year lease. There's an initial 5-year period with automatic one-year renewals all the way through that 5 years that would only not occur if there's a default or a force majeure type activity. Then at the end of the 5th year, Chesapeake Marine Tours has the option at their discretion to extend for another 5 one-year renewal terms. So like I said, the city should consider this a 10-year term. It could be only 5, but that would be at their discretion.
Is it a mutual term, or is it is it triggered only by the leasee?
It's triggered by the leasee, so she has to specify that she wants to go forward with it.
Okay.
And it's just one of those caveats, if the relationship or the economics or whatever change, if we did want to be locked in for a full 10 years, we want to have, some marker for reevaluating. The other change, which is sort of minimal here, is in prior years, because we did the leases so much in advance, we would calculate the rent based on the year prior to the lease being approved, and then we would include an escalator to account for the fact that the lease is actually going into effect about 3 to 5 years later. Here we're going to do an actual calculation the 12 months prior to each year, so we're not going to have the escalator because it's going to reflect actual market conditions the 12 years prior. It's based on a multiplier of linear foot and what the dockage fee was for the whole prior year. So it's the same formula, we're just not including an escalator because we're not doing it so far in advance. I think those are the two biggest changes. The lease premises is not changing. Otherwise, the responsibilities for how they have to take care of things is not changing. You are welcome to, the council is welcome to invite them in every year for discussions, checkups. We just have to give them notice, a couple weeks notice, and they'll come into a work session or whatever to do updates, annual updates.
What department heads have signed off on this?
We have involved, the harbor master has been involved, Public Works has been involved, are the two primary
Okay.
ones. Obviously, because the harbor master keeps tabs on all of this, and then Public Works sort of keeps an eye on how the facilities are being used and what's going on with the dock areas.
And speaking for the three of you, then no further concerns?
No.
Okay, great, thank you. Ms. Gosselin, anything you'd like to add?
No.
Okay,
I'm happy to come in and talk to the council whenever they'd like me to.
great. Anybody else present that wishes to speak about this legislation? Okay, and we don't have any amendments to consider, so I think, unless, any questions from the council committee? Ready for a motion?
I would move approval.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
None opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both for your time. Sorry that we had to postpone it temporarily. Okay, continuing now, we're on ID 11817, Update Forest Drive Sector Study. And again, I'll provide a little context for why I asked for this agenda item. The 2009 Annapolis Comprehensive Plan calls for various sector studies. This is one of them. It's obviously been a long time since 2009, a long time coming. Other sector studies have been done, and it's finally Forest Drive's turn. Forest Drive, everyone here is familiar with. Politically speaking, it affects 4 wards directly and 2 wards indirectly, but very close, and then probably all wards to some extent. So there's a lot of concern. I know there's been a lot of previous studies. There's a lot of interest in this sector study. So my understanding is that this sector study is just getting underway, and I thought it useful to check in before it gets too far along to make sure that it's clear to at least this committee on the purpose and objectives of the study, and to make sure that the right parties are included in discussions now and along the line. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Director Gutwald or Dr. Nash.
Good afternoon. Pete Gutwald, Director of Planning and Zoning. With me, as you stated, is Dr. Sally Nash, Chief of Comprehensive Planning, and who will be the project manager for this sector study. On the onset, we provided additional information based on an email exchange from Alderman Littman. I try to provide more of a textual element. I know my PowerPoint presentation was more of illustrative purposes, but I will know this is a little more of a fluid moving process at this point in time as we move forward, and as Alderman Littman mentioned, making sure we're going in the direction that everybody wants us to move in that direction. So as mentioned, the purpose of this study was to analyze the corridor, look at and engage. The primary purpose, I should say, is also to get engagement from the public sector, to do engagement with the local citizens and businesses, and to get a flavor and idea of what they see as some of the concerns are associated with this corridor. As part of that process, I should say this includes not just the Forest Drive sector that's identified in the 2009 comprehensive plan, but also the Bay Ridge area identified in the comprehensive plan. And now we are moving and investigating the area to include the Eastport Peninsula area. We are currently engaged in a conversation with the consultant. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. If I'm remembering correctly, on page 3 of this presentation, we're looking at the map, and the top left portion of that's in blue highlight to be covered goes directly to Irish Allen. My recollection is that the previous version had it doing the zigzag to Chinkapin and then the Old Forest. Am I remembering correctly that was there a change in what the scope is?
What are you referring to? It's just a, yeah.
So, okay, so Director Gottwald, you see on the map on page 3, it shows up clearly, I bet I don't know if it's clear for you, at the terminus at Aris T. Allen Boulevard. Just before that, there's a bullet point right at what we know as Chinkapin. The previous version of this had the zigzag of doing the right on Chinkapin and then the left on that portion of forest up to Route 2.
Well, I think there's a whole buffer that is associated with that whole 3.5-mile corridor. So it will include areas. Yeah, if we move forward in the presentations, you'll see.
Okay.
I don't know what slide this is, but this is talking about the study area that we included in the University of Maryland's Partnership for Active Learning Centers and Sustainable Communities. We picked a 5-mile radius along the corridor, a larger radius of areas to be included and communities to be included, not inclusive, that it could morph to other communities as well as we go through this process.
Okay.
So if you look at some of the later slides, you'll see that whole buffer corridor going from Bay Ridge. Those are sort of the endpoints of the corridor, but that is in terms of the area beyond that, within that corridor, there could be additional areas to be included.
Yeah, on page 11, it looks like the original version was kept, where it does not go towards Aris T. Allen, although it might be included in the half-mile buffer that you included, but it does go towards the Old Forest.
We do need an updated project map, but we were trying to decide how we were going to incorporate what part of Eastport, how to show all of that on the map, but we do need to update our project map.
Are you both essentially saying that it doesn't matter which decision because they'll both pieces will be included in the project? Okay.
Yeah, we're not.
So it's not a decision point, they'll all be included.
Right.
All right. I'm sorry for the interruption. I'm just trying to make sure we're on the same page of what we're talking about.
So you spoke to some of the background. A lot of this information was sort of outreach efforts to have people who didn't know about the forest sector study or what was included in the comprehensive plan to identify this. I wasn't going to go through necessarily the background which you just described as opportunity areas in the comprehensive plan, and that the next slide shows that there's been a lot of work done in this corridor in terms of transportation, if you will, identifying different corridor studies and planning studies that have been done in this area of the city.
Are those studies available to us?
They are. They are all on the website, correct?
They are not all on our current website, but I can add them to I'll make a Forest Drive sector study website that will have previous studies.
Thank you. That'd be helpful.
And so I guess my point with this is that there's been a lot of studies that have been done with this, so I was trying to develop a sector study that wasn't a typical traffic study. And Sally, you can go through the next sort of showing the opportunity areas and the objective that is drawn out of the RFP. But the idea is that we would integrate some of the transportation and land use issues associated with it that affects that. And what are ways in which we can improve the corridor regardless of what the traffic studies are dictating to us. And then what are the things that we can do to improve those land uses associated with that have impacts to the corridor in terms of a transportation study. So you can see that there's a wide range of zoning classifications, and I've already talked about the objective and the zoning classifications, and then the study itself. But what we have started to do with the partnership with PALS and the University of Maryland was start doing an inventory of all the different land uses, the existing land uses that are out there, and sort of getting an idea of what is susceptible to change and what is not susceptible to change, and sort of doing an analysis of that. And from there, I wanted to build off of that to sort of identify what are the things that the community is looking as important and priorities to them through a public engagement process. And the idea is not to just go out there and say, okay, what is it that you think that needs to be changed, or things that are important to you, but to have a continual dialogue. So the idea that we're working through right now is that although we will have a public work session, or a public workshop, we will continue to engage with them through social media, through a website, and that they're not only just they're not just providing input to the department, but other individuals are seeing what they're talking about. And then they're also interacting with those individuals. So we are, at this point, working with the consultant, trying to figure out what is the best way what venue should we be using to do that, so that individuals are seeing not only, are seeing what the department is saying, but what other individuals are saying. And that is not a one-night deal where they come out and they hear what everybody has to say. It's a continual and ongoing dialogue, so we understand, so we continue to refine the things that people find out in this corridor are important to them, and ideas that will better and develop that corridor one way or the other, whether it's just improvements today or it's looking to the future. One of the things I say in terms of these things, in terms of typical transportation studies, is that they analyze the projected growth in the corridor, and then they identify a number of improvements. And a lot of those improvements are well out of the reach of any county, state, or local municipalities to achieve. So we want to develop sort of strategies that are implementable, and then implementable by pieces. They can build on one another. It's not just one and done. It's building pieces and building blocks associated with this. Because of the corridor, and I've heard this time and time again, that there's this transportation issue along this corridor, that we continue to look at things in a typical traffic engineering sense, and I want to sort of redirect that and look at it from a different perspective of ways we can improve the corridor and the quality of life of issues along that corridor. And Alderman Littman, I understood from you as we were developing the RFP that we really needed to make this sort of a transparency process, learn from the community, not us sort of directing the process, have them sort of tell us sort of what the things that they think are, a tolerance level, if you will, or what it is that they're looking for into that corridor, and the improvements that they see need to be made, regardless of whether it's traffic related, land use related, maybe it's community facility related, and maybe it's economic development related, maybe it's market related. Those kinds of things that we can work on to continue to create a sector study that is more comprehensive than just a transportation analysis and land use analysis. So with that, we're trying to build off of what PALS did. So what they developed sort of was if you want to go into, I guess we have some of that information. Sorry, Sally, I moved off the topic. But what they did was do an inventory of properties, looked at what was susceptible to change. We have a basis, we have a methodology. They made certain assumptions that if it was a certain acreage and it only had a certain amount of development on the property, that it had potential for new development. Or if it was of a certain age, and that it had and it was commercial use, then it had potential for redevelopment of those properties. And this was just their assessment. We really wanted to go back out to the community and find out what their thoughts and ideas are. But to build off of this idea, they created a trip generation sort of scenario based on those different properties and what were the projected analysis associated with that. We wanted that project to go a little bit farther. It didn't get to the point where it wanted. We ran out of funds and sort of time associated with the University of Maryland to do a build-out scenario, but we did develop sort of the groundwork for that model. And right now we are in conversations to bring you back to a status report where we are with the consultant, is looking at the community viz program, other transportation models that can build off of this. What's added a little twist to this is that we had this done for just this area of the corridor. We're now looking at expanding it out to the Eastport So how do we do that since this baseline of information has not been completed? And we are working with the consultant on those thoughts and ideas to expand that geographic area, because we do understand there is an interrelationship between all of that. And we have not heard back from the consultant at this point in time. I'm out of sequence, I think, of my slides, but I sort of wanted to express that a lot of that information that we handed out in terms of textual information that we handed out today, I'm sorry I didn't get it out earlier, is in that information that I handed out to you, describing some of the background information, describing sort of what the PALS project did and what the objectives were associated with that, and then what our milestones and deliverables, if you will, or sort of the next steps with the Forest Drive sector study. We did go out to the Annapolis Neck Peninsula community and described the same process to encourage participation from everybody and anybody. We plan on doing more public workshops. We right now have originally just sat down with the consultant with the modification, if you will, to adding Eastport. The recent developments of adding Eastport into this was a topic of conversation, and then obviously a topic of conversation was how to handle the existing land use and transportation aspects of building that model in that corridor. So when the community does identify certain ideas, thoughts, and concepts in that corridor, we can do the analysis with sort of a couple of keystrokes and get the information back to them to say, okay, what does this do, and how does it affect the corridor at all? So our original, what we were calling a kickoff meeting, was just a meeting sitting down with the staff. We did invite the University of Maryland to come in and talk to them about the community viz model, along with the consultants, and discuss how we could move forward on the modifications, and of course giving them all the information associated with the previous studies and what we had done with the University of Maryland. We have not heard back from the consultant at this point in time in terms of what the additional costs associated with this, and I think we have sort of given them sort of two alternative scenarios of how we want the transportation, or the analysis, if you will, done with land use and the traffic component of it. Moving forward, obviously, looking at the timeline, we're a little behind, but we will continue to do some of the outreach efforts, the surveys, and the data collection on through the spring. We will begin interview stakeholders. I think Sally handed out to you the stakeholder list that we preliminarily developed. It's not cut in stone at this point in time, but that is sort of the encompassing list that we put together as a stakeholder. Through the fall, we will continue doing the data gathering, and then hopefully by next spring we'll be out doing public meetings.
And I was going to say, if you have any stakeholders you'd like me to add to the list, please email me.
Have you tried to target, I haven't seen this list yet, so it's kind of small, so I have to adjust, but have you targeted the business owners along the corridor?
That's really one I need more of. I think I got most of the neighborhood associations, but I know I am missing a lot of the business contacts. I have SOFO, but
Have you been able to get information and businesses from SOFO?
Well, I haven't reached out to them yet.
Okay. I don't see who your contact is yet, because I haven't found it yet, but Jennifer
Balducci.
Yeah, and she'll be, I'm sure, more than happy to provide you the members of the organization, because that's all business owners in that corridor.
Okay.
I know further up there's Chuck Walsh. I hope and assume he's on this list. I don't know who else. Certainly don't know all the owners of properties.
Any thoughts and ideas you can give us?
Well, there's certainly clusters. I mean, so there's like the Clock Tower Plaza. I'm sure once you get in with somebody there, they can direct you to the
I
rest.
was trying to find, is there some kind of management agency for a clock tower?
I understand that particular parcel just sold, so Bob Lipson just sold it. He's not the owner
okay.
anymore.
Oh, right.
Yeah. I don't know who he sold it to, but
Oh.
I don't think he's the owner anymore.
Oh, okay.
He could tell you. I mean, Bob's available, and Bob would know that information. Alderman Pfeiffer, Alderman Arnett, do you have questions?
Quite a bit to digest. When will we know when Eastport is added to this?
I'm hoping any day now. We reached out to the consultant, we had the conversation a few weeks ago, but we have not heard back what the cost would be, and some of the strategies we want to include, so,
What are the pros and cons, and what's your best case scenario?
well, my initial concern is that we had a lot of groundwork done with the University of Maryland along the Forest Drive. We did not do the Eastport, so there will be some additional work that will have to be done on that in terms of the susceptible to change, the redevelopment opportunities. But at the same time, I'm hoping I can pull some information. We are in round 2 with the University of Maryland, and that is looking at underdeveloped for the whole city. This was ahead of that game. They used part of that information to do it for the rest of the city. So I got 2 things going on at the same time, and I'm not sure one will be available with the other. So we have to just see what she's looking at in terms of the data we gave her associated with the Forest Drive corridor, that she can incorporate that into Eastport. And I guess that's what's sort of delaying that. I really don't have an idea. Do you have an idea?
I talked to her last week, and she said it would be soon. So I would think hopefully by the end of this week.
On the timeline, number 2 says ongoing 2018. Does that mean did you mean 2017 through 2018? Just make
Yes.
sure. Okay.
Yeah, we're going to do that right up from the beginning. So
Who's doing the interviewing for step 3?
Mainly our consultant, but I will be going with her on the interview.
Okay.
staff will participate the whole way through, but it will be sort of run by the consultant. That's how we've done other sector studies. So.
Okay. I know we have people from the audience that wish to speak on this topic. See by show of hands who's planning on speaking today? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On this topic? All those people for this topic? All right. Why don't we start with our commissioners first? Mr. Moldman, Mr. Heller, Mr. Moldman, no. Mr. Heller. Whichever is more convenient, just as long as you have a mic with a bright green light.
Thank you, Alderman. My name is William Harold. I live at 18 Spindrift Way in the city of Annapolis. I currently serve as a member of the Planning Commission, and I've been a member of the Planning Commission for about 8 years. With that, my comments today are really in 2 parts, and I'll be quick. The first part is that I would add my voice to those who I think you'll hear from as you go forward, that would urge you to use your influence to restart this project. And I say that not from the standpoint that what's been done has been wrong or worthless, because I think there's much here that's probably very valuable and can be used, but I think that it has gotten off on the wrong foot, and I think that it would be very important for the city to just hit the restart button and go back to kind of ground zero and start over again in a process that I think could be considerably more open and inclusive. In part, I would like to see them include the Planning Commission. We have statutory responsibility for planning in the city of Annapolis, and yet I don't believe this project has ever been on our agenda. We never were consulted about a scope of work. We did not hire a consultant. And so I don't even know if we're on the list of stakeholders. That would be an interesting question. But it's a situation where I think we've developed a closed mindset or a closed approach, and I would like to see us open that up. And I think other speakers will probably address that. My second comment is really departs from that, or extends that, and that is, I think that this project is not the problem. I think the project is a symptom of the problem. And I think the problem is the process by which we do planning in the city of Annapolis. And in this sense, if I could compare it to something very familiar to members of the committee, and that would be the Forest Conservation Act. Forest Conservation Act, enacted by the state, was a very different animal than what the city of Annapolis had cobbled together and implemented and eventually settled on, those, 20 years ago, whenever that was done. And you spent a lot of time and effort redoing that to bring us into some conformance with how the state legislation expected that to be done. I think there's a close analogy, frankly, with how the state expects planning to be done. And I would urge you to touch base with state law and see who's responsible for what the roles and responsibilities are, how this is supposed to go ahead. And I think that if you do reach the conclusion similar to mine, you would understand that the project is not the problem, it's how we go about things. And that's what I want to see us try to tackle. And I realize that it's not within the purview of the Environmental Affairs Committee, but three influential aldermen, I hope, can act to help to push this forward. I know that Alderman Arnett, for example, has personally told me that he has concerns about our planning process based upon an entirely different project in an entirely different area that's going on in Eastport, and that he's raised questions about, well, how do we do this, and why do we do it this way anyway? I think it's appropriate for us to go back to that and kind of go back to the founding legislation that gives us our charge and identifies our roles and responsibilities so that we can do things right and do the right things. And with that, that's my comment. Happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Gutwald, any response to that?
I guess my response is that we are just beginning this whole process. Outside of putting together the request for proposal, identifying, working with the alderpersons as well as staff, putting together the RFP, the project is still open for anybody and everybody to be participatory. We are still developing the list of stakeholders. We certainly welcome the thoughts of the Planning Commission into the process. In fact, as I've mentioned, even though we do have the RFP out there, we are still sort of scoping the work out and morphing it as we go forward. So there's still lots of time for that participation to occur, and I welcome all of it. So.
Ms. Leonard, just give it 1 second, Alderman. Ms. Leonard, can you help this committee give with some guidance on the state law that Mr. Harold is referring to, and help us understand the parameters of who should be doing what?
I can. I'm not sure I can do it in this particular moment,
That's
but
fine.
I'm happy if he wants to submit it or you want to submit it. I'm happy to take a look at it.
Please, I certainly don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you could.
Yeah, I'm happy to look at it. And
The citation that was sent to me, I was just trying to look for it while Mr. Harold was speaking. Maryland Land Use Code annotated 3-110 and 2-104. But I am certainly not speaking as an authority on the subject, and look for you to take us wherever we need to take.
yeah, I can take a look at it. I mean, I look at the land use article here and there, but I obviously don't have it committed to memory.
Okay.
I can also solicit some documents from the American Planning Association, the Maryland chapter of the American Planning Association, which teaches a course for new planning commission members, which I took several years ago. And of course, that's where they begin with the foundations for the planning process in the state.
Yeah, I think having that foundation and kind of getting a clear view of how this sector study is supposed to develop, and either confirmation that we're doing it right or correction if we need correction. And aside from that, Mr. Gutwald, are you open to having this on the agenda for the next, or a suitable planning commission agenda?
Sure. Agendas have been a little full lately, and like I said, the project is still morphing, so I just feel like there was, a lot of information that I wouldn't have answers to at this point in time. But we can certainly do a presentation at the Planning Commission to update them as where we are and where we can incorporate them into the process.
Thank you. I'm certainly sympathetic to both the need to have momentum and make progress, and have milestones and hit those milestones and make progress, and at the same time be inclusive so everyone feels like who felt like they should be a part of the process, was a part of the process.
I'm not trying to do that at all. I'm trying to make this as open as possible. As people are asking me to talk about it, I am receptive to it, and there's means or progress to try and eliminate anybody. It's supposed to be an open process. I mean, part of the purpose of this, and particularly when you and I have discussed, is to make this as an open process, to have everybody bring their thoughts and ideas to the table, and that it comes from the community, because there's a lot of concern in that community, as you know. And what we need to address and what we can address may be two separate things, and that's where I'm struggling with right now.
It's an incredibly challenging corridor between residential of all sorts, from Robinwood to other types of residences. You have business, you have different types of businesses and size and scale. It's certainly a challenge. And transportation, of course, is a underpinning concern to everybody. Right. I apologize, Alderman Arnett.
Well, no, you anticipated both of my questions. I did want to follow up. Having spent a little bit of time lately with the state land use policy, I'd certainly like to get more information on that, and I definitely think this is appropriate as soon as possible to be before the Planning Commission. This is one of the principal functions of the Planning Commission, is to help guide us on all of these land use issues. So I certainly look forward to that. And on land use issues, I think I think it's always been important. It's been huge. Crystal Springs certainly put it on all of our radar, but I think the anxieties about land use in general and traffic specifically are just getting more and more, I want to say the word violent, but vehement, I guess, amongst the constituencies. I mean, people are complaining about not being able to make left-hand turns out of their neighborhood, and we've got to get on this. This is, if we don't get on it, they're going to get on us. So I think this is huge. I'm not sure about a restart, but I think certainly a more open process and get more people helping to guide it while it's still at a fairly initial stage. I'd be interested in exploring more what restart would mean, but
I would say it's, if I can interrupt, there's nothing started, so there's no restart. So I think there's plenty of opportunity here to incorporate. Like one of the first tasks is, and what we're dealing with right now, is sort of scoping out the detailed work program. We haven't done that. We've got a proposal and we select a consultant, but that's as far as we've gotten so far. So.
Well, Mr. Harold, what is your notion of restart?
Well, my notion of restart is starting at the beginning, which is to why we need to do this anyway. This particular project, as I understand it, combines two of the sector studies called for in our comprehensive plan. So it's not just one roll of the dice. This is sort of double stakes. And I would, if I were king, I guess I would imagine that the Planning Commission would be a place to start with that. And I think that if you're already having kickoff meetings and you've hired a consultant, you've got a scope of work. And so I think the Planning Commission can do the job of jumping on board and moving train. Hopefully we can sort of help direct that train before it gets too far down the track. But again, it's a process. How could we get to a point where we've got a double whammy, a super important project going on in the most controversial, most congested corridor of the city, and we don't even know about it? So it's a kind of like, what's going on here feeling. And I think I can speak for the Commission saying perfectly willing to do what we need to do to jump on board the moving train, but we're not just going to sit in the caboose and say, oh boy, isn't this a great ride? That's what I talk about with respect to the process. And so hopefully you can help us get back to what is envisioned in the law so that we can do our job, the job that the citizens expect us to do. And it's, the frustrations, because I've shared that with all of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Walker, would you like to speak next?
Walker or Walker?
Walker. Mr. Waldman, you said no when I asked if you were speaking, right? Just want to make... All right. Your right is reserved.
We have it,
I do, thank you. I think I do.
With them then.
Good afternoon, Greg Walker, 727 Harness Creek View Drive, Annapolis, Maryland, and I maintain my consulting office over in Eastport. I appreciate your time as always, your greatly underpaid service to our city. I dove into this and put these materials together, and I won't be long because the meter's ticking, and now you guys can give tickets much easier than you used to with modern technology. But what I'm giving you is, I've got 5 little packets here, and the first one is 1 page. It's the most important, and that's my recommendations for what should be takeaways from this study. And then what's behind that is basically backup to support all that. Traffic is a focus, but certainly environmental is too. I got into this in a big way a few weeks ago after Planning and Zoning gave their presentation at the Annapolis Neck Peninsula Federation. And it was basically the slide presentation you saw, maybe it was a little bit longer, a few more slides. The Q&A immediately went to traffic. Every single question was traffic, 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 with many requests for a moratorium. If you're starting this corridor study, why don't you put a pause on approving big projects until you have the answers? So that was the nature of it. And then after there was some discussion, they'd been working with PALS, there'd been some work done. We were able to obtain a copy of a presentation that PALS from the University of Maryland had given to Planning and Zoning staff. I don't know who else was there in December. And it had some very important things in there we felt that were redacted from what's posted on the city's website, so I'll go over that. But so on packet 1, my suggestions, and these are mine, my first one that's not on here, but after the discussion today, I'd love to be one of the constituents who's added to the list to participate in the team. Thank you. I would say restart the process so that the scope and the effort to establish the deliverables is very clear. I think other commissions and boards, businesses, elected officials, and others need to have some input. When this project is done and they hand it out, it needs to be a very valuable planning tool going forward for elected officials, for the Planning Commission, for planning and zoning, for developers, landowners, and citizens. That's my biggest concern. It should be that when it's finished. Modeling, I think, for traffic and growth should include all the possible projects, not just those that are approved. We have a history of not modeling with everything that could be built, and maybe that's part of the plan that Pete and Sally have, I don't know, but I'm going to show a couple examples of that. I think we absolutely have to work with the county and the state on the roadway issues. I think our comp plan, what it specifies at once in the sector studies are clear on that, and I'm going to point that out. You know, a gating item for this corridor is Shinkopan Round intersection, and that involves the county and the state, and I think we need to have this go Bay Ridge to the end and Aris T. Allen to the end. Some parallel projects that I think need to move along in parallel with this project to make the sector study more valuable include those I have listing. I would suggest getting a legal opinion on what's the required nexus of a development to be able to charge that development. I think that would be a useful tool for the Planning Commission, certainly. For example, for years now, we've had on a list of the Forest Drive corridor simulation that there's a list of fixes that need to be done. These are listed as adequate public facilities. We really need to do it at Bay Ridge, Hillsmere, Forest Drive intersection, and none have been assigned yet, but we're going to identify developments to pay for it. And when I ask, well, we've approved 150-plus home Parkside Preserve near there and gone quite a ways down the path with Eastport development, and it hasn't been brought up with either of them. Who are we expecting to ask to pay for that? Well, there's got to be a nexus. It's not close enough. I believe from talking to people in the area and knowing in my professional experience in other states, if you have a sector study and a planning study that says on an aggregate basis, this is a problem, you can charge people impact fees to fix that problem. I think you should get a legal opinion on the need to complete the new traffic impact regulations that are called for by the comp plan in a specific policy, and I'm going to go over that, and the site design manual to replace the 1986 manual that's listed as a specific policy. For council, I would note, if you don't have it, a lot of the legal analysis of this was laid out in presentations to the Planning Commission in a work session in the fall of 2015, and if I get your email, I can send all that to you. Might be helpful. And some of what Commissioner Carroll was talking about too. Because I don't think these are optional. I think these are things that need to be done. The traffic impact regulation revisions were supposed to be done in 3 years. They're not done. And it's my understanding, and Ms. Broadbent might be the one that would know more from talking to Jim Urban, a longtime member of the Planning Commission, that had moved down the road a fair bit, and he thought it was close to getting presented for a final approval, but maybe he was thinking of something else and it didn't get done. But when one of the things a sector study is supposed to do is to make the 4 opportunity areas be, model sustainable environmentally. Well, if we haven't even put in place this new site design manual that we've called for since '09, let's get it done.
Sorry, that is in place, Greg. It's on the webpage.
I'm sorry, Dr. Nash, I didn't hear you.
We have that. It's on the webpage. It has been updated.
Did it go through the Planning Commission and public comment? Oh, it wasn't adopted. Okay.
I think the thing that Mr. Walden and I have talked about was just something that showed the planting of trees, city street trees. That's different than the site design manual that Dr. Nash is speaking of.
Okay. But regardless of what the legal opinions say, that, these need to be done because they're policies, and the state statutes say your development regs must include the policies in your comp plan. I can send you that legal analysis too. We don't have any secrets. Work through the Forest Drive Corridor Improvements Assessment template. The last thing I've got attached here, we have a listing of every proposed fix for the Forest Drive corridor. This includes 7 or 8 new ones from the county's 2016 major improvement infrastructure studies. Some of them maybe are not so useful, some of them might be, but the point is, at the end of this sector study, let's have a list of really viable fixes that we're all comfortable. Let's not carry something like the relief road that we did for 15 years, and with Dr. Nash's help, that got knocked off the list on the, 6-year update of the comp plan. But we've got a lot of things on there, and there's got to be some minimal engineering, and there's got to be working with the city and county, and the state when it comes to Shinkopan Round and Spa Road and some others. Let's have a final list that we all know. And look, if we don't think there's a development we can assign one to because of this annexus issue, then let's not keep putting out reports that say we're going to assign it to a developer to fix. Let's recognize it's got to be city, county, state money and get on with it. Okay, so the objectives of the sector studies are on packet 2, and all I'm going to say is what our comp plan says the sector study should accomplish is they should address the necessary role of the city and other public entities in infrastructure. To me, that's city, county, state on the road issues, and how we're going to develop these lands as models for ecologically sustainable urban development. That's what our comp plan says is supposed to be included in this sector study. The back 2 pages of that are the two policies that I say need to be implemented. Let's get these traffic regs and let's get the site design manual that's been through the formal process of vetting, planning commission, public comment. Packet 3.
Mr. Walker, I hate to do this to you, but I need to wrap up. We've got
Okay.
15 minutes left and more people that want to speak.
All right. Packet 3 just summarizes the studies that show that there's problems on Forest Drive. I note that the city guidelines say if an intersection or any movement at the intersection is E or F, it's a no-go, you got to fix it. So I've attached 3 more recent studies that show major problems. I think it's all self-explanatory. Packet 4 is where we have to end up with on traffic, in my opinion. We do not have a short-term, medium, or long-term traffic plan. At the end of this sector study, we need one. These are the reasons that we need it. We have to work with the city and state to get it. And the last is the template on the back, packet 5, and that's the template I've said, which lists every possible fix that's been addressed and every report that's been done for fix in Forest Drive. Some of the cities, for example, talk about widening Forest Drive in places, and the county's most recent study in 16 says we don't have any plans for widening, so let's get those off the list as fixes. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Walker, I appreciate your time, and Mr. Harold, I apologize if I forgot to thank you for your time. Obviously, an hour and a half is not enough for all of these discussions in detail.
To that point, Mr. Chair, clearly we need to schedule more time, maybe even have an intervening, because this is good stuff and it's really striking home for me with the issues I'm having in Eastport.
Right. Mr. Gottwald, would you like to respond to anything that he said before we move on to the other speakers? Okay. Just like to be courteous to you. Who else wanted to speak to this? I don't know the gentleman in the front in the green. Mr. Dave, I'm going to save the last 5 minutes for you. So you're going to get 5 minutes. But gentleman in the green? Peter, okay. And Diane, you'll be next. And I'm sorry.
We're both from the
okay.
Civic Association. We're kind of interested
Fantastic.
in traffic issues.
And Mr. Waldman, I'll get back to you. And Diane, you'll excuse me for making sure you're on the express version of this.
Yes, I live at President Point Condominiums.
Speak up, please, and I don't know if the green light's on.
President Point Condominiums in Eastport.
Thank you.
I endorse what I've heard from the Planning Commission and also Greg Walker. In my former life, I did a lot of management consulting. I've led studies such as this. The scope worries me. It sounds like it may be too broad. So I think it's key that the scope, while you ultimately determine to want to address the comprehensive nature of what you've described, the scope itself and the deliverable should be reviewed by stakeholders at the outset. I think it would be a mistake to just get the scope worked up by people in this room without consulting with the stakeholders as well. And secondly, the specifics of the Eastport dimension of the traffic study and the planning would be very important for those of us in Eastport to see.
And I'd like to add, as the
name and address.
Diane Butler, 407 3rd Street, and I'm on the Eastport Civic Association. And again, I reiterate what Mr. Bittner just said about having the stakeholders be part of the study if we're going to be lumped into the larger corridor study in Eastport. I would ask that the stakeholders, including the Eastport Civic Association, be part of that study, or at least get informed and have some input into what's happening there, because I know we have a lot of concerned citizens. And as to the issues that Mr. Harold brought up and Mr. Walker, we agree wholeheartedly that planning has to take place more comprehensively than it has been in the past. It seems to us, many of us in Eastport, like we are seeing projects come up and we're reacting to them piecemeal instead of having a big plan in place where we say this is what we need to accommodate retail and business, and here's what we know is going to be residential. Let's try to make it all work and not take residential or take business and commercial away and have residential in areas where that are zoned commercial and retail. It just seems like the planning process has to be more comprehensive and not reactionary to one developer at a time.
Thank you. Mr. Waldman, did you say you did want to speak now?
I didn't plan on adding to this flurry of words, but I will. First of all, I want to thank you. You obviously have opened up a boiling pot of water here, and I think it's very important. My comment, there are things that have been said here that range from the meta down to the very specific and factual. So I'm keeping that in mind. I want to go down actually what Mr. Walker proposes. Some of his proposals are quite creative and stuff that I've never even thought of before. First of all, this specific study needs to include all possible projects, and it needs to go to the end of the peninsula, and it needs to include all of the whatever they're called, arterials or collectors or additioners or donors of traffic to Forest Drive. I mean, you can't do this sector study without being that comprehensive. It has to include all possible projects, best case scenarios, worst case scenarios. This is some of the specifics. On a more meta level, as Mr. Harold pointed out, and this is one of the first times I think Crystal Springs brought to the surface about how we're sort of lurching into approving projects without really knowing what the downstream consequences are, and now we're dealing with the downstream consequences where even more projects are planned. And there are going to be even more projects planned over the next 30 or 40 years as pressures for density increase. So we need to get on it, and this is the first sector study that I've seen, frankly, that could focus in and be really a help. The last one that I saw that was really successful was the City Dock Master Plan. On that meta level, then, the notion of a moratorium is quite tantalizing, I must say, in order to get this done. And on the other hand, studies can take a long time, and there can be a lot of pressure from the business community and so forth to get things done. And so this can't be restarted to the beginning, but it needs to be diverted, deflected, or new cars added to the train that's already leaving the station. I mean, it's I hope that metaphor makes sense. Staying on that meta level, while we're thinking about it, this hearing this afternoon began with discussion of budget and money and how fees could feed into paying for things on a self-sustaining basis, frankly. Well, in an analogous way, the notion of impact fees is something I frankly have I've never heard of before in the city. I mean, oh yeah, you got to pay for the sewer connection, but what are the real impacts? That discussion, of course, has been going on around the country with new developments and who actually pays for things. But I don't know what's going on in this city for people to pay for impacts and what the 12 townhome development is supposed to pay and what the 300 apartment unit development is supposed to pay. So this calculation could be crucial to the long-term financial health of the city and to how we evaluate projects specifically as they come along. It's the first I've ever thought of it. Now, maybe that's because I've been out of it for the 20 years I've been on the planning commission, but I didn't think so. Then, kind of bringing us into the kind of middle level of importance and perspective, Mr. Walker raised some very interesting points, which I've heard discussed over the years, which in other words, what are our rules on what a traffic impact study is supposed to include? Okay? How far does that go? Does that include some of these longer-term impacts? What is in fact, the nexus, which is, I hope, a legal opinion that we're going to be getting at some point, of what they're supposed to pay for it? I understand, came up in the Eastport Shopping Center issue, but, well, they'll work on that specific little intersection. But 127 apartment units, and perhaps, you know, with 2 people living in each apartment, another 200 to 250 automobiles, what's downstream, further out towards Forest Drive? So I'm sorry to lay all of this on poor Mr. Gutwald, who now has more responsibilities than probably anybody else in this room, but looking at how we do traffic impact studies and what's responsible is crucial and part of this. The site design manual, or what we used to call the landscape design manual, Mr. Walker sees that as quite important link in all of this. I'm not so sure that I do. The point would have to be made to me how it could be that important. But I would note that we actually went pretty far down the line in getting something done. I think it should take a new look at it, a creative look at this manual as to what we expect out of anything from parking lots to, you know, to Nexum, down the line. We'll take any of those. So those are just my thoughts. I think that some of the specifics of what needs to go into this sector study and the traffic analyses are available. I mean, Pete has already often said, you know, the county's done stuff, we got this, we got that. So I'm going to trust in that process. I do think it should come before the Planning Commission. You should just get a gut feeling for what people want out of it. From what little I understood of, I'm sitting in the back, couldn't hear well, but what little I understood of what Mr. Gutwald said, I applaud in that this sector study should be like many other sector studies, and it should go beyond just traffic lights, cars, and so forth. I mean, it should go recreational facilities. It should go, what kind of properties should we be negotiating to turn into parks? What kind of bicycle things should be going on with this? What kind of a community center should be built? This part of the city has not gotten the attention that it really deserves in terms of real planning, and this sector study is the best opportunity I have ever seen to be as important as the Ward 1 one was, and we're still using it 25, 30 years later. So with that rah-rah, I'll retire.
Give us some direction, if you will, on where do we go from here. Our time for the day is winding up, and we're just going to still hear from Artma for 5 minutes. Should we have regular updates to this committee? Do you want the regular updates to be the Planning Commission? Give your input.
You know, we're more than willing to do all of the above. So again, all inclusive. I'm not trying to eliminate anybody out of this process. Like I said, from the get-go, right after we did the RFP and we did the selection process of consultants, this thing has been morphing, and we were trying to learn more and more every day. I know there's discussions about specifics, but that's because we're trying to learn as we go along, because it is morphing and changing, and when we are learning more things from different people about this corridor and what they want this plan to be. So we are still working on that, and we will continue to work through that, but we need to, we need to keep the train moving in order to establish that. But part of the outreach effort is to hear those kinds of thoughts and ideas so that it is incorporated in the sector study as we move forward.
Okay. Well, with that, I suggest if my colleagues agree to put this back on the agenda for the next monthly meeting, okay. And we'll at least go from there. And whether it should continue or not, we'll just make it a month-by-month decision.
Okay.
And we'll look for that update. I hope that, especially since we're in budget season, this project is going to be the be-all for end-all for solve all problems on Forest Drive. You're going to need some funding, so I hope you have give some thought to that and ask for the help that you might need to get this done. And because you've got big expectations of you both, so you'll need the support of the council and the funding.
No pressure.
Yeah, exactly. I promised Dave 5 minutes to speak on another topic, and I think you might also want to speak on this.
Good afternoon. My name is Dave Humphreys. I'm the Executive Director of ARTMA, the Annapolis Regional Transportation Management Association. We were created in 1992, ARTMA was, which happens to be coincidentally the year that I moved to Annapolis. I've been with and held the position of Executive Director for the better part of 7 years. And during that time, I've worked closely with the city on a number of issues. As a matter of fact, we were created because of the 1992 Environmental Protection Act, the compliance with the 1992 Clean Air Act is what I should say. We still are non-compliant. So environmental issues are key to what ARTMA is about. This study is only peripheral to my concerns, which are much broader, and I'd like to take us up to about 30,000 feet again. I wrote an editorial, and it appeared in the Capitol on Friday, and it related to the issue of mobility and land use. and land itself. The takeaway from that article, that editorial, really is, without mobility, there is no such thing as land use. If you can't get to or from the land, you don't have use. Land use has been historically, in both the city and the county, relegated to a position of one of the infrastructure components that you consider: schools, sewers, water, what have you, forestation, reclamation, or many other infrastructure issues. That is totally wrong and totally incorrect. Mobility must be considered at the very outset. Quite often, the only time mobility is addressed, especially in this city, is when a traffic impact study comes up. We've already gone through a planning process, have preliminary approval, then we consider mobility. And quite often it's done by a consulting firm hired by an attorney who is working for a developer. We've seen time and time again reports that do not support the city's position on anything but only that of the developer. Anything but a disinterested study. Our relationship with the city has put us in a role of being involved in virtually every planning study since I've been aboard, and really since 1992. You will find references to many of the planning documents that show ARTMA as one of the technical advisors on the report, involved intimately with the preparation of that study. That ceased about 2 years ago. Now, some of the things I'm going to say are going to be disconcerting to some of the people in the audience here. However, why did it cease 2 years ago? Is it because of the mayor? I don't think so. The mayor selected me to chair the transition team. I was on the transition team for transportation for Mayor Josh Cohen. As a matter of fact, the transition team before that, all three of those teams recommended we have a real Department of Transportation. What that means is one that accounts for transportation planning, traffic engineering, and transit considerations, whether or not it's a bus company or not. Maybe we don't need one. I don't know. The point is that recommendation has been going on for about 12 years. The same applies to the county. And their transition team this year recommended they get a Department of Transportation. It's made up of existing staff. It doesn't cost money. And that was ignored at the county level. We've ignored it at the city and the county level, to our peril. And a shining example is the corridor that is addressed in this study. In no way can you plan anything if you don't understand what the mobility needs of the corridor are and what the shortcomings are and what growth can and cannot take place. It's not magic. We can predict all of this with land use. You can always predict the kind of trips that will be generated. What happens is you have changes to the zoning that change the number of trips and the kind of trips and the times they occur. The city has been guilty of this time and time again. You are now reaping the whirlwind that you have sowed with developers building. I must say that the planning department has no capability to deal with transportation planning or traffic engineering and relies on consultants and traffic engineering impact studies. That might be a debatable point, but I doubt it. I have offered my services through ARTMA to assist them, to no avail. So the past 2 years have seen no ARTMA participation in studies, even when I went to the meetings and they said, and that is the director and other people, oh yes, we'll have ARTMA involved. It was never the case. We have not been involved. Am I that hard to get along with? I hope not. But I am honest. And there's nobody in this room that can fire me. And that gives you a certain kind of sense of speaking the truth as you see it. And as I said, this is not a pleasant subject to sit here and talk to you people this way, because I respect all of you. I respect everybody in this room. But I am finding it appalling that we are not dealing with reality. We recommended an MPO be investigated.
There's another.
I'm almost done.
Thank you.
In our transition team. That was dismissed out of hand, not by the mayor, who thought it was a great idea, but by city staff. And then it was eradicated from our report without our knowledge. That was unconscionable. Nonetheless, I offer my services again and those of ARTMA to assist the city in this process. I would like to be party to it. Those are free services I'm offering. So please take that into consideration, and let's get a balance between land use and mobility. And I am done. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Ms. Broadbent, we didn't get to your agenda item of the one-year update. We'll just postpone that a month, until next meeting, if that's okay with you.
That's fine with me. It'd be that much closer to a one
Dave?
year.
Dave, before
Dave.
Dave.
Come back.
No, I was so busy taking notes and listening to what you're saying. You can feel free to contact me because we have run out of time, but I'd like to talk about some next steps. I'm all for free services, so if you could get together with at least me, I think actually you need to come back to this committee. I was impressed with your equation that mobility and land equals land use. We need to hear more about that. So
I'd be glad to
we'd
do
like
that.
to invite you back.
Dave, I'll also point out, Alderman Budge is the chair of the Transportation Committee. It might be interested in what your comments are, or you might want to get on his agenda as well.
It's my intention to meet with the Transportation Committee. As a matter of fact, you have one of my board of directors on your Transportation Committee, person who I think the world of. Her name is Amy Jones.
Okay.
Mind you, she'll be the mayor someday.
Thank you again. Apologize, everyone's having to be rushed today. So 119, the discussion one-year update we'll do next time. Environmental Commission, Ms. Butler, I apologize. We obviously ran out of time today. We'll do that next time as well. And Forest Conservation Projects, we'll do again next time as well. Thank you, everyone. If there's nothing further, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. All those in favor, aye? Aye. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everyone.